We're looking at something absolutely profound today. I'm not talking about a shiny new app or some minor software update. No, we are diving into a literal civilization-scale systems engineering breakthrough. So let's get right into it, because what we're about to explore here fundamentally rewrites the rules of how global infrastructure operates. We are examining a permanent structural upgrade for humanity, a compute-backed trust layer.
I want you to really just sit with this quote for a second. Trust is not a feeling. Trust is a computation. You know, for millennia, we've basically treated trust as this fragile human belief, right? Like a social contract or maybe a centralized decree. But if we put on our systems engineering hats, we actually have to reframe trust entirely. It's fundamentally a physical verification problem. It's something that can actually be calculated, proven, and totally rooted in the unwavering laws of physics.
And that brings us to why this matters right now. All civilization runs on verification. Just think about the physical world around you for a minute. Power grids routing electricity, massive container ports clearing logistics, global data centers humming away, intricate supply chains. Every single one of them depends entirely on one core thing: how we verify state transitions. Did the cargo actually move? Did the payment clear? Was the energy delivered? If the verification mechanism is slow or, flawed in some way, the entire civilization creates friction.
All right, let's move into Section 1, the architecture of trust, building on the movement of value.
For decades now, we've essentially built towering economic structures on substrates that were just never designed for the scale of a modern world. Look at the foundations of our current financial systems. They completely govern the movement of value, but they're constrained by slow reconciliation and bound by highly energy-intensive trust mechanisms. To put that into perspective, verifying truth on our older computational rails often burns literally enough electricity to power small nations. It's wild. And that's because they were built on this incorrect assumption that verifying a transaction inherently must be slow, global, and ultimately fragile.
Which leads us to Section 2, the limits of probability and the architectural flaws of consensus.
So let's look at the actual architectural constraints of probabilistic consensus. Most modern digital settlement systems out there rely on consensus algorithms that, at their core, just approximate agreement. They suffer from what we call probabilistic finality, which basically means you're never actually 100% sure a transaction is settled until enough time has passed. And what does that lead to? Forks, network splits, chain reorganizations. Not to mention the massive energy burn, incredibly high latency, and super strict throughput ceilings needed to secure this guesswork. Relying on probabilistic voting creates just a massive amount of friction and uncertainty in our human infrastructure.
But here is the paradigm shift. Section 3, the deterministic breakthrough. Same input, same output, every single time.
So what exactly is digital settlement in this new paradigm? Well, it's compute-backed trust. It's verification expressed entirely in physics. By encoding structure directly into computation, we completely eliminate the bottleneck of global consensus. Think about that for a second. Trust is no longer this fragile human belief. It actually becomes a physical, undeniable behavior. Every single state transition is computed deterministically.
Notice the stark contrast between these two models we're looking at here. Probabilistic trust basically says, hey, it's unlikely this will change. It's a guess, right? A highly educated one backed by a ton of energy, but still, at the end of the day, a probability. Deterministic trust, on the other hand, says it cannot change. In a deterministic model, outcomes are identical across hardware, across time, and across scale. Trust literally emerges from reproducible structure, not probability.
Now let's break down the systems thinking behind this. Section 4, the settlement triangle, a new optimization framework.
For years, systems engineers have been totally trapped by these technological trilemmas. Forced to sacrifice speed for security, or maybe security for scale. But here are the three pillars of the new framework: speed, security, and determinism. Because verification in this new model becomes local, parallel, and hardware accelerated, these systems can actually optimize all three pillars at the exact same time. You literally don't have to choose anymore.
When we compare these models side by side, the magnitude of this leap becomes super clear. Legacy consensus gives you an approximate output, whereas deterministic verification is exact and completely reproducible. We're moving from high-latency guesswork to absolute instant finality. Structurally, we transition from probable states to hardware-verifiable truth, and we do it without relying on those energy-heavy miners. And honestly, here's the most fascinating part to me. Because throughput isn't bound by global consensus anymore, as the system grows, performance actually improves. It's a total game changer. Deterministic systems don't wait for consensus, they produce truth. Let's just let that one sink in for a second. In this architecture, auditability isn't just some add-on feature or an afterthought, it's inherent. Every transition carries its own physical proof of correctness baked right in. You don't need to poll a network to ask if a transaction is valid. The computation itself literally proves it.
Okay, let's look at the macro impact. Section 5, Civilization Scale Settlement, a fractal financial architecture. Because this flawless local verification scales perfectly, just look at the real-world capabilities it unlocks. We're talking machine-to-machine payments occurring instantly, millions of IoT microtransactions resolving without any network congestion, flawless supply chain verification, massive infrastructure settlement, and real-time clearing between giant institutions, all completely underpinned by continuous, physics-rooted auditability. The architecture models these layers so coherently, zooming all the way from tiny microtransactions up to massive, systemic macro behavior.
And this brilliantly illustrates where we're actually heading. The future of settlement is not humans sending money, it's machines transacting continuously. It is absolutely fascinating when you really think about the scale of that. An architecture rooted in physics is literally the only conceivable way to support a civilization that runs on information rather than friction. When you have millions of machines interacting every single second, they can't sit around waiting for probabilistic finality. They require deterministic truth.
And that brings us to this ultimate macro reality. When systems become predictable, societies become stable. This deterministic technology connects directly, and I mean directly, to the stabilization of our physical world. It brings absolute predictability to commerce, to logistics, to global energy markets, and even national-scale infrastructure financing. It's quite simple, really. Capability breeds predictability, and predictability breeds stability.
Which brings us to our final chapter, Section 6, the trust engine, moving from belief to computation.
Cryptocurrencies showed us that trust could be digital. They opened the door, right? But digital settlement shows us that trust can be deterministic. It's not a belief. It is not a vote. It is a computation. This is a permanent structural upgrade for humanity. We are looking at the foundation for an entirely new era of human coordination, one that is built on reproducible structure rather than massive energy expenditure.
Digital settlement, the trust engine of a stable world. Verification becomes deterministic, trust becomes computational. The future isn't relying on consensus, everyone, it's relying on physics. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I want to leave you with one final thought. If trust is no longer a human vulnerability, what will we be able to build on top of absolute certainty? I'll see you in the next one.